Welcome, everyone. This is the Buttercup Podcast where we talk about early childhood topics. My name is Marisa Macy, and I'm the host of the Buttercup Podcast. I'm super excited because I have Jani Kozlowski here with me today, and she is a passionate early childhood professional with a disability, a child of a parent with a disability, and a mother of a son with a disability. This collection of unique perspectives frames her work as an author, presenter, research investigator, and consultant. Jani provides professional development and technical assistance for state leaders, educators, and other practitioners. She currently leads initiatives focused on early childhood inclusion at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute at the University of not Nebraska, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And we were just there last month for the wonderful Inclusion Institute. And she currently leads initiatives focused on early childhood inclusion. And she's the author of Every Child Can Fly, an early childhood educator's guide to inclusion, and a companion guide for families. And that one is entitled Empowering Your Child to Fly, a Family's Guide to Early Childhood Inclusion. Jani has been an early childhood inclusion advocate for 30 years. Welcome, Jani.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Marisa.
Great to be with you. How did you get started in this field?
Well, Marisa, I was a preschool teacher, like many of the folks that you have interviewed on the podcast. But I actually started in the field before that because I was a nanny. So, yes, I was Jani the nanny in the very beginning
That's awesome.
for, for two little preschool boys. But I went on to teach preschool, an inclusive preschool program, and had very spirited groups of 4-year-olds in my classroom. So that's how I got started.
That is awesome. Jani the nanny. I love that. So
Yeah.
you were like Mary Poppins and you had two
I,
children.
I thought I was going to be like Mary Poppins, and I thought I would be the Mary Poppins of motherhood, Marisa. And then I had a child of my own, and it didn't turn out that way. I was just as lost many of the times as every other new mother. So, it's one thing to teach and it's another thing to parent, and they're both beautiful ways to interact with children. Um, I've loved both experiences, but I've also learned that you're always learning, and in early childhood, every single day is a new adventure and a new way to learn about kids and teaching.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you have so much experience in our field, and uh, I can't wait to talk to you about some of the things that I got to learn from you when we were in Chapel Hill last month.
Mhm.
But what I wanted to start by asking you is your two books. So you have a book for parents, and you are a parent, like you
Yeah.
just talked about. And then you have another book that's for professionals. Would you like to talk a little bit about both books?
Sure, sure. So, yeah, so I took those experiences as a nanny and as a preschool teacher. Then I went on and got my master's degree in child development. I worked in Head Start as a regional technical assistance provider. I was an education and disability services manager for a large migrant Head Start program in Michigan. And then I went on and did some work in North Carolina for the Smart Start initiative. I was the early education specialist for Smart Start for about 7 years. I worked in North Carolina state government, and so got to um, think about early childhood policy. I was our legislative liaison. So I went to our General Assembly in North Carolina and um, tried to convince legislators about the importance of early childhood. I worked on our QRIS system in North Carolina. And then I went on to the national level and worked for national professional development centers funded by the Office of Head Start and the Office of Child Care. And now, like you said, I'm at the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. And so I work with state early intervention and early childhood special education leaders. And all of those perspectives, as well as my own personal experiences, I felt could be helpful to our field. I am a person with a disability. I'm a little person. I have a condition called spondylometaphyseal dysplasia, which is a form of dwarfism. And my son was adopted from Ukraine, and he has ADHD and developmental delays, and so had an IEP all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. He's now 27 and thriving, a young adult, and has really done some amazing things. But anyway, all of those experiences as a person with disability and as a parent and as a teacher, I wanted to share those stories with childcare and Head Start and state pre-K teachers, along with what I've learned about early intervention and early childhood special education. So a way that was really catered to, a childcare teacher who certainly doesn't have a special education degree, but wants to be able to serve every child. And so I wrote the book for teachers, Every Child Can Fly. And there's a story about that if we have time. And then after I wrote that first book, it was really great. I enjoyed speaking with teachers and sharing that work, sharing the stories. And I let my husband read it after it was in print. I was scared to have him read it before that. And his reaction was this would have been really helpful to us when we were in the thick of it with my son, with our son. So he said, why don't you think about adapting it for families? And so that's where the Empowering Your Child to Fly came from. So the Every Child Can Fly came out in 2022, and the Empowering Your Child to Fly came out in 2024. So it's just been a really cool adventure and journey. And I've learned a lot along the way.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you for writing both books and for both audiences, multiple audiences. Well, what's the story behind the flying? Every
The
child can
title,
fly. Yeah.
right? Yes, children flying, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, they
one
fly and
day,
Mary Poppins.
I know, I see a theme emerging, right? No, so I was sitting out, this was before I even thought to write the book, but I was sitting out on my balcony and watching. I've got some grassy area in my backyard, and so I get to see a lot of wildlife and different kinds of birds. And I was sitting there drinking coffee one morning, and this hawk with a 8-foot wingspan came flying out of the corner of my eye. It was like a shadow went over the sun. This was like pterodactyl sized hawk came flying over and right in front of me went down into a nest and snatched a baby bird right out of the nest. Yes, it was a violent experience. And that baby bird was squawking and wriggling and squirming. And I guess it was just too squirmy because the hawk dropped the baby right in front of where I was sitting. And it went down, 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 and landed in the tall grass. And I was there watching this in my PJs, drinking my coffee. I was thinking, is this really happening? What's going on? Um, but suddenly that the hawk flew away and that baby started to cry. And I thought, you better hush because that hawk's gonna come back and get you. But instead, what happened is the mama bird came and she was fluttering around. She was very distressed. And I could tell that she was thinking, how did you end up in this situation? I just saw you back up there in the nest, Um, how did you land here? What's going on? And, I was thinking she was probably imagining, I can feed you and take care of you, but I can't put a half-grown baby bird on my back and fly you back up there to the nest, right? So anyway, I was just imagining what was going on in this mama bird's mind. And I could tell that, she just didn't know what to do. And eventually she flew off, and that baby bird was quiet for some time. And I was just thinking about that baby is kind of a metaphor of the children that come to our classrooms. And, they come to us in a lot of different ways. Some of them leave the nest in a traumatic sort of way, like that baby bird. Some of them come to us, and they already know all of the things that we're going to teach them in early childhood. Mama bird leaves them with a peck on the cheek and off she goes. But there's just such a range of experiences that our baby birds come to us with. So I was kind of thinking about that as I was watching, and the grass started to rustle a little bit. And believe it or not, that baby bird flew. So even though it had just fallen from the nest, been carried by a hawk, dropped down, it flew. And it was a really pitiful looking fly, I have to say. It was very wobbly. It was not like a adult bird kind of fly, but it was a fly nonetheless. And it flew off. So I told all of my early childhood friends about this, and and they had the same, opinion that I did, that that's kind of like where we are on the ground, and that with our care and our nurturing, every child can learn how to fly, and it might not be in the same way as every other bird, but they will fly in their own way. And so that's kind of where the title came from. And the book starts with that story, a little more articulate than I just shared it, but that's how it all started.
I love that. That is such a beautiful theme about
Yeah,
resiliency, hope, uh,
right.
the environment. And
Yes.
we just celebrated Father's Day on Sunday, and just
Mhm.
um, the the environment and families
Right.
and what children need and babies need to fly and
Right.
uh, and just the element of resiliency. That story
Yes.
gives so much power. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah. One of the things that I hadn't thought about when I shared the story with Tim Belegas, he does the Think Inclusive podcast. I shared that story with him, and he was thinking about the mama bird and about how, she wanted to do everything she could, but eventually she just knew that she had to let her baby go, that baby bird had to figure it out on their own. And I thought, yeah, that really is true for families as well, that we try to support our children as best we can and provide the best start that we can. But we have to also step back and let them fly on their own at some point. So yeah, it was a simple little thing that happened to me, but it's been a nice metaphor for the work that I do.
Yes, that's beautiful. And both of your books are published with
Griffin House.
Griffin House.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll put that in the show notes in
Okay.
case anybody wants to go to get a copy. Um,
That's good.
so you are uh, able to provide resources to the nation through your work at the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, ECTAC,
Yes. Yeah.
and
ECTA. Mhm.
ETCA, Early Childhood Technical Center.
Technical Assistance
Technical
Center.
Assistance Center.
Yes.
I always call it ECTAC, and then I can never remember what do all the letters mean. But I go to your website probably 5 times a month, maybe even more, to look something up. Or, I mean, there's so many rich, wonderful resources
Are
that you can find there. Do you want to tell the audience what it is and some of the resources they could find?
I will. I will. I'm doing this podcast with you, kind of wearing my consultant hat. Um, because we're talking about my book, and that was, that wasn't written as part of my work with ECTA. But I have a lot of resources from ECTA highlighted in my book because, like you said, there's so many great opportunities for learning there. So it's ectacenter.org, I think is the website. And you can find lots and lots of resources around early intervention. What are the requirements for Part C? Supporting infants and toddlers with disabilities. And then a lot of resources and supports for state leaders and community leaders around preschool inclusion. One of the things that I have worked closely on and served on the national team that developed are the ECTA inclusion indicators. And those indicators are at the state level, the community level, the program level, and then the early care and education environment level. So lots of great ways to think about inclusion and do some self-reflection, whether you're a state leader, program leader, or work in the classroom um, or a home visitor, for example. Those indicators are super helpful.
Yes, yes. And so children might be in inclusive settings, classroom settings, or group settings, and um, your background with Head Start and all the experiences that you have, you probably have a treasure trove of ideas and tips and advice for listeners. So my students watch this, and are there some tips that my students can use when they try to create inclusive settings for children, all children?
Absolutely. Well, the notion of universal design for learning, I think, is a really powerful concept for us in early childhood. It came from this uh, it came from a framework that's used in architecture and designing public spaces. So, those curb cuts that families use with their baby strollers, and people that use wheelchairs use those curb cuts to get up on the sidewalk. That's kind of a classic example of universal design, that something that was created to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, is also something that's helpful for all people. So a wheelchair user benefits, and a parent pushing a child with a stroller, or somebody coming home and having a rolling suitcase, those curb cuts are universally um, appreciated. And so at NC State, the CAST Center came up with universal design for learning, where they took that concept and applied it to the learning environment. And, in a nutshell, there's lots you can read about that. And maybe we can put that link in the show notes as well. Shout out to my friends at NC State, but, and it might have been another university as well that was involved. So shout out to whoever was the original creator of those UDL frameworks. But then the basic notion is that when we think about learning environments, how can we create spaces and ways of being with children that work for each and every child, regardless of the abilities, the skills, the backgrounds, the early experiences that child brings. How can we create learning that appeals to everyone and that's accessible to everyone? So I think it's a beautiful way of thinking about inclusion, and about um, why it's so important that we serve every child, including children with different abilities, in regular early childhood spaces. Because that's kind of
Yes.
what we envision for our world, right? That we can create a world that everyone can access. And it starts in early childhood.
Yes, yes, I love that. And uh, uh, that was such a great example about the curb cutouts. And so all of us can benefit from those curb cutouts. If you ever came home from the airport with your suitcase, or if you're on a bicycle, or a
Right.
skateboard, or pushing your child in a stroller, and if you use a wheelchair, just having that universal design that helps everyone be able to access the environment. In Italy, they have a lot of different architectural design
Hmm.
ideas that you can get when you go to visit in Reggio Emilia. And I was at this one school that had windows that went from uh, like the ceiling all the way down to the floor. And
Hmm.
uh, the professionals, they call them democratic windows. And when you ask them about, different things related to their design, the reason why they call them democratic windows is because it can benefit everyone in the environment.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
are a person in a wheelchair, you can, see out to the playground. You don't have to
Hmm.
try to get, you know, able, up to be able to see. If you're a child who crawls and is on the
Yeah.
floor a lot, you can crawl over to the window, and that's democracy because we can all enjoy what's on the other side of the window. And
Yeah.
and so yes, the environment is so important. And in Italy, in Reggio Emilia approach, they call it the third teacher, that the environment
Yes.
is so important, and the intentional design supports learning and development. And we can do that in our group settings and in our classrooms when we create universal design for learning, and a lot of these other ways too, where uh, the environment can support all the people in it. Well, thank you.
Right, right. And if we think about the environment, it isn't just the physical environment, it isn't just making wide spaces so that a wheelchair user, for example, could get through to all of the centers in a classroom, for example. But the environment is also about kind of the social environment that we set up, the temporal environment, how we design routines and the activities of the day. So teaching practices really come into universal design for learning as well. And the choices that we make as educators around access and supporting all children to participate and engage is really what we mean by inclusion. So, for example, if there is a sand and water table, is it set up so that a child in a wheelchair could use it? Or are there materials in the sensory table that appeal to all children? Some children might have some sensory issues with sand, for example. And so I've seen a teacher use different kinds of materials in the sand and water table, like black beans, for example, that might not have that same sensory experience. Thinking about the ways that we support children to paint, for example, that if a child is not yet able to hold a paintbrush because of some fine motor delays, there are other things that they might use, like sponges, um, or even matchbox cars. Lots of different things that we can paint with, that's still painting, but that is accessible to everyone, to each and every child. So there's all kinds of ways that we can think about the environment. And yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love thinking about universal design in that way. And it's really cool as educators to get creative when you have a child that might not be able to access what you're trying to teach or share, and getting creative and thinking about ways to adapt it so that that child can access the content. And a lot of times it's stuff that all children benefit from, like visual supports, for example, having a photograph and a description, or using language on um, as a as a sign for some materials, for example, that doesn't just benefit a child that is a visual learner and needs that visual support. It's also helpful to every child, you know. So yeah, lots and lots of examples there.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for adding that too, because it's the physical environment, it's the temporal environment and how we create our schedules and how
Hmm.
we respect and honor time um,
Right.
and then the social emotional uh, contextual factors and the environment
Yes.
for social emotional development and
Right. Supporting
able
peer relationships and yeah, I call the social environment the vibe of the classroom. Is there a vibe of belonging and membership here? Something
yes.
that you can tell pretty quickly when you are in a space. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jani, I went to one of your sessions. You had more than one at the Inclusion Institute at UNC Chapel Hill recently, and the session that I just I was taking so many notes because I learned so much. I've never been to Japan before, and you did a session on your trip to Japan and what you took away with the environment and things related to teaching and early childhood programs and education in Japan. Do you want to give a little summary of your experience?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I was awarded some funding through the Richard Clifford International Learning Environments Fund, and it allowed me to partner with my colleague Dutaro Shintani in Kyoto, Japan. And so my family went with me, my husband and my son, and we traveled to Japan last fall. And I was able to visit three different early childhood programs there in Kyoto and Osaka and Miyamaki. And it was just amazing. I learned about the way that Japanese instructors think about autonomy, and they have this practice that's called mimamoru, which loosely translates to watching and waiting. And so the notion is that as educators, if we see conflict, if we see a child struggling with something in their learning, rather than rushing in to help right away, that we watch, we take a beat, we allow a little bit of time to go by to see if the child can work it out on their own. If through peer relationships, if maybe a peer steps in to help, or if there's a conflict between peers, if there's a resolution that they come to on their own, maybe using the tools that we've provided them to think about problem solving together. So really taking a moment to before stepping in. And I love that. And I saw lots of examples of that in Japan, lots of examples of allowing children to engage in risky play and um, to engage in the environment in a way that in the United States, I think we would step in more quickly, out of concern for safety, for example, or just I call it the hover teacher phenomenon. you know, um, I think of it as a mama bear as a parent. That's how I was as a parent. I was a true mama bear parent. And then I was also a hover teacher. And I was always wanting to step in and fix things and help. And what I've learned is that if you do take a moment and take a beat, many times children are able to resolve the conflict on their own. And that helps to develop this sense of autonomy um, and independence, And so I saw examples of that. And even with the equipment that was available to children, Marisa, one of the things that the whole group really started laughing about was that in Japan, at least in this early childhood program I went to, there were rows and rows of unicycles, and the 4-year-olds were riding unicycles,
Wow.
one wheel.
I
And
can't
oh my gosh,
even
I was so I was just, my mouth hung open. And my colleagues there were sort of like, what's going on? Does this not happen in the United States? Because there were children just riding unicycles all around the playground. And they said, children in the United States can't do that. And I said, well, maybe if they're in a circus, they would ride a unicycle. But there, there were pogo sticks, there were climbing walls, there were there was water play with a rocky area surrounding the water. There were those plastic crates that children could stack on top of each other and build structures to climb up on. Lots and lots of opportunities for risky play, for children to experiment with what their own physical capabilities were. And I noticed that even though there were these things that could be dangerous, the teachers were just always there. They were watching, they were stepping in when necessary. And it was just a really different way of teaching. And it was that way on the outside environment and then also on the inside environment. Another image that I shared was of this tower that the children had made out of these little wooden slats, little rectangular pieces of wood, and they built this tower that was almost to the ceiling. It was so tall. And the teachers that were sitting in the front row of my session said, oh no, that's going to fall on somebody. How could that happen? So it's a very different way of looking at teaching children. And yeah, and it reminded me a lot of my own experiences growing up with a disability and the educators, and especially I was never excluded in any of the academic classes through school, but I was segregated in gym class because of my physical disability. And so every day I would spend gym class in the coach's office to do homework and kind of catch up on reading. And at the time, I thought, this is great. I don't have to put on gym clothes. I don't have to do all of that stuff. But in retrospect, I really think that that experience kind of sent this message to me that I was not the person to do physical things, that when other children were engaged in active play, when they were playing basketball or out on the court or the field, um, I was kept safe in the coach's office. And as a result, it really sent this message to me about my own capabilities. Um, and and I was reflecting after that trip to Japan about the things that we do to set children up for success. We also need to think about the ways that we are supporting the stories that they are learning and telling about themselves and their own capabilities. So giving children opportunities to stretch, to engage in risky play, to try things on their own, to do that watching and waiting. Um, and risky play can be risky in the physical sense and creating block towers, but sometimes risky play is also learning the skills to just ask a peer, can I play with you? That's a risk. That's a social risk. So anyway, I just learned so much through that experience and seeing the learning environment through a different cultural lens. It was really cool.
Jani, congratulations on the award. That's so exciting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the award and tell us who Richard Clifford is?
Sure, sure. So Richard Clifford is a researcher, and I learned about his work back when I was in grad school myself because he is one of the authors of the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale, the ECHRS, and the ITERS and the FICRS, SAKERS. So Richard Clifford, along with Debbie Cryer and Thelma Harms, developed those tools that have been really influential in our field and are used in a lot of quality rating systems in some states. So it was really an honor to get to travel to Japan, using funds from that award to study learning environments. And I use the inclusion indicators because, Richard Clifford's work really focused on not just learning environments, but also the assessment of learning environments and using it as a way for teachers to reflect about the materials that they have and the connections that they make for children. So, so I used the ECTA inclusion indicators that I mentioned earlier as sort of a frame through which my visit was made as well. And so one of the indicators is all around child autonomy. I also looked at relationships, and I wrote a couple of articles on my Substack newsletter about the trip with some of the photographs that I mentioned. So can put that in the show notes too if your listeners want to read more.
Yes, that is wonderful. Thank you. And those images that you showed in your session and sharing the background and the context, uh, it was amazing to see. And I think anytime we can uh, travel and see things in other countries, in other places where other languages are spoken, other cultural contexts. We learn so much and we bring back so much. And I think your sharing that experience you had was so transformative and shows the power of being able to go on location. And the way I talk to my students about study abroad and travel like that is journey afar to discover within, because
Oh, I love that.
you learn about yourself and you learn about
Yes.
home and you reflect on things when you see other opportunities and with the environmental context that you talked about. One of the things that I loved was with the shoes in the classroom,
Yes.
how you showed the pictures of all the children in their shoes and how different classrooms had different shoes and how they organize things. And I was thinking of you a couple weekends ago because on I watched this show on Sundays with Jane Pauley, CBS Morning News, and they were talking about Japan and the food that children eat in schools and
Mhm.
cafeteria food and how wholesome it is. And uh, I think it was a story on obesity or something, but it was in Japan, and I was thinking, oh, this reminds me so much of Jani's presentation that she did. But thank you for sharing.
That's that's really cool because that wasn't content that I shared. I had to really cut it down for the session. But one of the things I noticed there as well is that every program had a garden. They had these boxes where children were growing vegetables. They had rows of watering cans and rakes, child-size rakes and hose that children just used as part of their everyday play. So they were growing their own vegetables. There was a always a way for them to look in the kitchen and see the cook. Um, there were, like big windows, and I went by and the cook did the peace sign and smiled at me as I walked by. They had all kinds of information for families about the food that they ate, what a portion size should look like depending on the child's age. Um, and there was this fabulous story on the website of one of the centers that I went to about this orange tree that they had in the outdoor environment, and that the children were so excited to see the orange blossoms and then the oranges, and then they would pick the oranges and use them in their, for their lunch. But then they also would take the orange peels and put them in a warm foot bath so that the toddlers out on the playground would have a warm foot bath, which is a very common, popular thing to do in Japan, foot baths, with the wonderful smell of the orange peels, so like a multi-sensory experience. Just that whole arc of how we think about gardening and food and connection to the people that make the food. And it just was so beautiful to see. I'm still going to write that article for my newsletter. So that one's coming about the food.
Yes, that's fabulous. And what a cool idea for the baby spa. I
Yes, it
love that
was.
idea.
It was
Very,
really neat.
yes. Well, and you talked about the philosophy of watching and waiting. and
Mm-hmm.
the power of observation in environments and how just different cross-cultural context for how we do observation and assessment. Um,
Yes.
and your colleagues there at UNC Chapel Hill and the work of Dr. Clifford and his team, I mean, they are trailblazers in assessment in what they created for us to be able to observe the environment. I mean, they're one of the, I mean, they are the first people to do what they did and
Yes.
study it and have an empirical basis for how we do observations of environment. And there's
Mm-hmm.
been many since then that have come out with contextual measures, environmental rating scales, different types. But they were the first, and wow, what trailblazers and things they gave to our field. When I talk about UNC Chapel Hill, I say it's the home of environmental rating skills and the Abecedarian study. I mean, it's a famous
Yes.
place. So many exciting research has happened at Frank Porter Graham, and every early childhood educator should know about the work that's been done there. And wow, what an amazing gift he gave to endow this award so that people can travel and see
Yeah.
environments in other countries and be able to bring that home and bring it back to the work. Well, Jani, I learned so much from you when I go to your sessions at conferences and your books and your
Thank
Substack.
you.
If you had to pick like a highlight of your career so far, does one come to mind about something that's
Ooh,
happened that just brings a smile
there's
to
a
your face?
there's a lot. There's so many really cool things that I've had the privilege of getting to experience in the field, working with leaders that I had just read about in grad school. It's just been amazing. When I think about a highlight though, in 2018, I was asked to come and be the keynote for the Inclusion Institute that you have attended. And it was the first time that I shared my story with a large group like that about my experience as a person with a disability and as a mom and the daughter of a parent with a disability. And I'm just so grateful to Pam Winton and Tracy West and Shane Lim for trusting me to share that stage and share my story. So, that experience led to the opportunity to do these keynote presentations that I do all around the country, really to writing the books, to feeling okay about being vulnerable and sharing that part of me, that then some of those stories went into the books that I wrote. I do a book study that's based on those stories and the content of the book. So just that first opportunity to share my story was really impactful and a true highlight
Yes.
for
Oh,
sure.
thank you for sharing. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, how can listeners follow you?
Well, I have a website. It's www.everychildcanfly.com. And you can find my books there. You can link to my Substack newsletter that's called Every Child Can Fly. I have an Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So I'm on all the socials. I'm really a procrastinator. So I don't, if you sign up for my newsletter, you are not going to get bombarded, I can guarantee, because I procrastinate writing those articles. But I do like having a space to, share what I'm learning and share links to things that I'm reading and other podcasts. So check it out, everychildcanfly.com.
That's beautiful. Well, and when you were talking about the Japanese philosophy of watching and waiting,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help but think of your story with the baby bird and how, how could that have been different if we didn't wait and just jumped right in and
Yes.
interfered with that natural moment that was happening for the baby. And uh,
I love that. I haven't thought about that, Marisa.
yeah, the watching and waiting. I just
Yeah.
uh, um, learned
Children
so
are
much.
resilient, aren't they? They really do. If we really need to trust children to figure things out, and they obviously we need to provide supports if children need them. We want every child to be successful, but we also need to trust and let children experience their own capabilities and discover what they're good at, what they enjoy, how they want to be in this world, because if we can just sit back and watch and wait, we benefit, the whole world benefits from diverse ways of doing things and seeing the world. So,
Oh, beautiful, eloquent words. We'll end on that.
okay.
Thank you, Jani. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Marisa. Appreciate you.